I was just protecting my town. People like her don't just walk around with that kind of authority unless there's a scam running. The low, dry hum of a cheap plastic desk fan buzzed in the corner of the Clayton interrogation room, cutting through a heavy, suffocating silence. Under the one harsh glare of a yellow fluorescent light that flickered with a faint, maddening click, Deputy Vance Kincaid sat with his arms resting on the cold steel table. His hands, usually so steady when gripping a steering wheel or a leather holster, were trembling, his cuffs letting out a hollow metallic rattle with every slight movement. He wasn't wearing his heavy-duty belt anymore. The raw, unaccustomed lightness around his waist felt like a physical brand of his sudden demotion. His mouth was dry, tasting of the stale, burnt coffee he had poured from the break room hours ago, and his eyes remained fixed on the scratched metal surface in front of him. In his mind, the events of the last 48 hours were replaying in a frantic, disjointed loop, a desperate attempt to find the exact second where his absolute authority had turned to dust. Just 2 minutes on the hot gravel of Route 9 had demolished a career he had spent 6 years building through raw intimidation and structured silence. He closed his eyes, but he couldn't block out the memory of the white-hot Arizona sun, the dust coating his uniform, and the quiet, immovable gaze of the woman he had tried to break. The silence of the room was heavy, pressing down on Kincaid's shoulders like a physical weight. Every tick of the cheap plastic clock on the wall felt like a hammer blow to his ego. He tried to swallow, but his throat was too tight, his vocal cords paralyzed by the sudden, terrifying realization that there was no one left in this building to protect him. His sergeant, Arthur Crane, who had spent years burying complaints on his desk with a quiet nod and a stamp of his pen, was gone, escorted from the building in handcuffs just an hour after the federal convoy arrived. The rookie, Jesse Cole, who had stood by the trunk of the car in passive, sweating silence, had already turned over his body camera and the cruiser's dash cam, eager to trade his partner's career for his own survival. Kincaid looked at his hands, at the red raw skin where the steel had bitten into his wrists, and felt a cold, hollow dread settle in his stomach. He had spent his entire life believing the badge made him invulnerable, that the uniform gave him the right to decide who belonged on his highway and who didn't. He was about to find out that the rules he had ignored for 6 years were about to be enforced with absolute, devastating clarity. The heat on Route 9 was a physical barrier, a shimmering wave of white-hot air that rose from the asphalt and made the distant red mesas of Clayton look like they were melting into the sky. Inside the air-conditioned cabin of the 2018 Dodge Charger patrol cruiser, the air smelled of hot vinyl, cheap pine air, freshener, and the sharp, chemical tang of Kincaid's expensive cologne. Kincaid sat behind the wheel, his fingers tapping a slow, impatient rhythm on the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the empty highway like a hawk watching a dry field. Beside him, his rookie partner, Jesse Cole, sat in rigid, uncomfortable silence, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his uniform shirt already damp, with sweat despite the climate control. Cole was in his 4th month of Drader probation, a quiet, observant boy who had grown up in the valley, and he had already learned that the best way to survive a shift with Kincaid was to keep his mouth shut and watch the road. "You see that truck back there?" Kincaid muttered, his voice flat, condescending, and heavy with a deep-seated arrogance that had become his trademark on this stretch of highway. Faded paint, dented tailgate, out-of-county plates. People like that don't come through Clayton unless they're looking for something they shouldn't have. You gotta learn to filter the road, Jesse. You don't wait for them to make a mistake. You find the ones who don't fit the landscape and you pull them over before they can bring their mess into our town. Cole didn't answer. He turned his head slowly, staring out the passenger side window at the endless expanse of sand and scrub brush, his chest tightening with a familiar, uncomfortable weight. He had watched Kincaid execute his filtering system a dozen times over the last month. He had seen him pull over a young, black student for driving a clean, modern sedan, claiming the vehicle's windows were tinted 2% past the legal limit, and force him to stand in the gravel for 30 minutes while Kincaid searched the trunk without consent. He had seen him detain a construction worker at dusk, questioning him about his destination with a quiet, menacing intensity that left the man trembling. And every single time, Cole had stood by the rear bumper, his hand resting near his police-in duty belt, his heart hammering against his ribs, saying nothing. He knew it was wrong. He knew the department's structured silence was a shield for Kincaid's deep-seated prejudice, but he also knew his own career was on the line. A rookie who reported a senior officer didn't get promoted, they got frozen out, assigned to the midnight shifts in the industrial yards, or left without backup on a dark road. So he chose comfort over courage, keeping his eyes on the desert and his secrets to himself. Kincaid leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a faded white 2011 Chevrolet Impala cruising toward the county line. The car was traveling at exactly 65 miles an hour, its speed locked into the cruise control, its tires tracking the center of the lane with absolute, disciplined precision. Through the rear window of the Impala, Kincaid could see the silhouette of a single driver, a black woman, her hair pulled back into a tight utilitarian bun, her posture straight and centered. He let out a low, dry chuckle, his hand reaching for the gear shift, his face tightening into the familiar mask of a predator who had spotted its target. "Well, well," Keynes murmured, his tone shifting into that sharp, mocking drawl that made Cole's stomach turn. "What do we have here? Old fleet car, out of town, plates, and a driver who looks like she's trying just a little too hard to obey the law. You see how she's holding that wheel, Jesse? Both hands at 10 and 2. That's not driving. That's a performance. That's someone who's terrified of being looked at because she's carrying something she shouldn't have. Travis? She's doing the speed limit," Cole said, his voice cracking slightly as he tried to keep his tone neutral, desperately hoping to steer Kincaid away from another hostile encounter. "She hasn't even crossed the fog line. Let's just head back to the precinct and grab some lunch. I don't need your advice on how to patrol my highway, rookie," Kincaid snapped, his voice cold and final. He pulled the Charger onto the asphalt, the heavy V8 engine roaring as he accelerated, the red and blue lights on his light bar immediately bursting into life, casting a chaotic, strobing glare across the desert gravel. "She crossed the yellow line back there, Jesse. I saw it. And out. Here, on my road, that's more than enough." The cheap window air conditioning unit in room 114 of the Clayton Motel rattled with a metallic, uneven hum, fighting a losing battle against the midday Arizona heat. Inside the small room, the air smelled of old carpet, stale chlorine from the pool outside, and the faint, sweet scent of cocoa butter. Maya Miller stood by the bed, her face reflected in the cracked mirror above the dresser. She was 42, her dark skin smooth but lined with the deep-seated fatigue of a woman who had spent the last 48 hours running a multi-agency sting operation in the valley. She hadn't slept in 2 days, her shoulders aching from the weight of the tactical vest she had just locked in her trunk, and her natural hair was pulled back tightly into a neat, disciplined bun. On the bed lay her dark windbreaker, her gold shield, and a leather portfolio containing her official appointment letter signed by the State Director of Public Safety. Maya was not a drug runner, and she was not a smuggler. She was a special agent and lead compliance auditor with the State Department of Justice, and she had been sent to Clayton for one specific, highly confidential mission: to conduct an unannounced audit of the local county sheriff's department. The department had been flagged by the state for a widespread pattern of racial profiling, excessive force, and systemic civil rights violations, and Maya held the final compliance pen. If her audit confirmed the widespread rot, the Clayton precinct would lose its $8 million federal infrastructure grant and face complete dissolution by the state. But Maya had chosen not to walk into the precinct with her captain's bars on her collar. She had spent 18 years in law enforcement, and she knew that when a department knows it's being watched, it performs. They wear their cleanest shirts, they use their most polite voices, and they hide their ugliness behind administrative protocol. She wanted to see the truth. She wanted to see how they treated a nobody, a black woman in a faded gray t-shirt and worn jeans driving a 10-year-old fleet car. She wanted to know what happened on the dirt roads when they thought no one important was watching. She reached onto the nightstand and picked up a small, scratched brass mechanical compass. It was a heavy, old-fashioned instrument. Its glass cover cracked, its brass casing worn smooth at the edges from decades of use. It had belonged to her father, Arthur Miller, one of the first black state troopers to patrol the highways of New Mexico in the late 1960s. He had given it to her on the day she graduated from the academy, and she had carried it in her pocket on every shift, every raid, and every quiet night of her career. She traced the Clayton engraved initials on the back, AM, her finger stopping over the worn metal. She remembered the night he gave it to her, sitting on the porch of their small Tellier brick house in Albuquerque, the wind chimes singing in the desert breeze. He had taken her hand, his palms rough from 30 years of work, and said, "Maya, when the lights come on behind you, you stay calm. You put your keys on the dash, your hands on the wheel, and you breathe. The sky doesn't care what color you are, but the man holding the badge might. You don't give him an excuse to look at your hands. You survive the stop, and you let the law do the rest." Maya closed the compass, the click of the brass lid sharp and clean in the quiet motel room. She slid it into the breast pocket of her dark windbreaker, picked up her car keys, and walked toward the door. She had spent her entire life navigating the boundaries of a world that tried to make her feel invisible. She had survived the stops, she had survived the classrooms, and she had built her authority with the quiet, heavy patience of stone. She was ready. The odometer of the faded white Chevrolet Impala ticked over quietly, the steady, rhythmic clicking of the dials almost lost beneath the dry, rushing whistle of the desert wind. Outside, Route 9 stretched into a flat, unbroken line of cracked asphalt, disappearing into a horizon where the sky and the dirt merged into a single, blinding haze of heat. Maya Miller kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Her right foot was resting lightly on the floorboard, her speed locked into the cruise control at precisely 65 miles an hour. She did not swerve. She did not drift. Her hands, positioned exactly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, were relaxed but firm, her knuckles slightly dusty from her drive across the state line. Then the mirror changed. A sudden, sharp flash of crimson and blue cut through the white glare of the afternoon sun, reflecting off the dusty glass of Maya's rearview mirror. Behind her, the aggressive, angular snout of a 2018 Dodge Charger patrol cruiser appeared, its red and blue lights pulsing with a frantic, sickening rhythm that seemed to stain the dry desert air. Maya did not gasp. She did not make a sudden movement. Her mind, trained by nearly 2 decades of operational discipline, registered the threat instantly. She checked her speedometer again exactly, 65, and then reached over with her right hand, tapping the cruise control button to disengage it. She hit her blinker. 3 slow, rhythmic clicks. She guided the Impala onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching loudly as they left the asphalt and bit into the loose sand and stone. A massive cloud of brown dust boiled up behind her, temporarily swallowing the Dodge Charger's front grille in a thick, choking scream of grit before the cruiser came to an N as in 10. Aggressive, jerky stop mere inches from her rear bumper. Through her side mirror, Maya watched the dust begin to settle. She saw the driver's side door of Crace. The patrol car swing open. Officer Travis Haynes stepped onto the shoulder, his boots crunching heavily into the gravel. He paused, adjusting his duty belt, his hand resting flat against the grip of his holstered Glock 19. His mirrored sunglasses reflected the empty desert, hiding his eyes, hiding the calculation he was already making. To Haynes, the faded fleet sedan and the quiet driver inside were not a routine traffic stop. They were an opportunity to assert his absolute, unquestioned authority over this empty stretch of highway. Behind the cruiser, the passenger door popped open, and rookie Deputy Jesse Cole stepped out. He was a thin, pale boy, his uniform shirt already dark with sweat, his fingers twitching near his holster as he took his position near the rear bumper of the Impala. Cole looked from Kincaid to the white sedan, his chest tightening with a familiar, heavy dread. He had watched his partner do this a dozen times before. He knew the pattern. He knew the structured silence of the Claire.com. Clayton Sheriff's Department was a shield for Kincaid's deep-seated prejudice, but he also knew his own career was on the line if he spoke up. So he stood there, his palms sweating, choosing comfort over courage. Inside the Impala, Maya went through her father's checklist. She turned the key, shutting off the engine. She pulled the key from the key, ignition, and placed it flat on the dashboard, right in Kincaid's line of sight. She rolled her window all the way down, letting the hot, dry desert air rush into the cabin, bringing with it the smell of hot rubber and exhaust. Finally, she placed both hands back on the steering wheel, palms flat, fingers visible. Her father's brass mechanical compass rested in her windbreaker pocket, its metal weight pressing against her chest, like a silent, steady anchor. Hands where they can see them. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. You, don't give them an excuse. License and registration, Kincaid demanded, his voice flat, condescending, and stripped of any professional courtesy. He leaned his heavy frame into her window, his shadow falling across her lap like a stain. He smelled of cheap pine, air freshener, sweat, and overpowering cologne. Good afternoon, officer, Maya said, her voice quiet, steady, and entirely devoid of fear. My wallet is in the inside pocket of the jacket on the Plozin passenger seat. I'm going to reach for it now. I didn't ask for a speech, Kincaid snapped, his jaw tightening. Just get the damn license. Maya moved with deliberate, slow precision. She unzipped her windbreaker with 2 fingers, extracted her civilian wallet, and handed her Arizona driver's license through the window. Kincaid snatched it from her hand, his eyes scanning the card before looking back at her face, his lips curling into a sneer. Sloan Jenkins, Kincaid read aloud, his eyes narrowing. You know why I pulled you over, Sloan? I do not, officer. My cruise control was set to the speed limit. You swerved, Kincaid lied, his voice rising, his hand shifting back to his duty belt. Cross the yellow line back there about 2 miles. Step out of the person-dashing vehicle. Maya did not move. She looked Kincaid dead in the eyes, her voice dropping into a low, heavy register. Officer, I have not committed a moving violation. There is no probable cause to order me out of my vehicle for a routine traffic stop. Are you deaf? Kincaid roared, his hand wrapping fully around the grip of his holstered gun, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He was a powder keg, his ego threatened by her quiet refusal to shrink. I said, get out of the car, or I'm going to pull you out myself. In the background, Jesse Cole took a sudden, panicked step forward, his hand shaking on his belt, his eyes darting to the empty desert around them as the situation escalated to the absolute edge of violence. The metallic click of Kincaid's Glock 19 safety being disengaged was a sharp, sudden crack that seemed to slice through the heavy heat of the desert. He thrust the barrel of the weapon through the open window, the cold steel hovering inches from Maya Miller's temple. His hand was shaking slightly, a nervous tremor driven by a surge of unearned adrenaline. The barrel cast a small, dark shadow on the side of her face. "Get out of the car," Kincaid repeated, his voice cracking with a high-pitched, dangerous intensity. "Open the door and put your hands on your head, or I swear I will make this your last stop." Maya did not flinch. She kept her hands exactly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, her fingers dry and steady. She breathed in slow, measured counts, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her face remained as still as stone. She could see Kincaid's eyes behind his mirrored sunglasses wide, bloodshot, and frantic. He was looking for an excuse. He wanted a sudden movement, a flinch, a panicky reach toward the floorboard to justify pulling the trigger. "Officer Kincaid," Maya said, her voice dropping into a low, heavy register that carried the quiet weight of a rock. "Listen to me very carefully. I am a sworn officer of the law. I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Phoenix Field Office. My credentials are in the inside pocket of my jacket on the passenger seat. I am going to reach for them now, very slowly. If you shoot me, you will be murdering a federal agent." Kincaid blinked, his breathing shallow and rapid. For a split second, the barrel of the Glock wavered. Then, a twisted, condescending grin spread across his face, his lips curling into a sneer of pure contempt. "You're an FBI agent?" Kincaid mocked, letting out a short, dry laugh. "Yeah, and I'm the President of the United States. You people will say anything to get out of a ticket. Show me the badge. Do it slow. You flinch, and I drop you." Maya moved with absolute telegraphed slowness. She lifted her right hand from the wheel, keeping her left hand visible. She reached over to the passenger seat, her fingers finding the cool, heavy leather of her credentials case. She brought it back into her lap, then slowly lifted it toward the window, flipping it open. The gold shield caught the brutal afternoon sun, glinting brightly. Beneath it, her official photo and identification card read, "Maya Miller, Special Agent." Kincaid snatched the leather case from her hand. He held his gun on her with his right hand, while he brought the badge up to his face with his left. He stared at it for 3 seconds. Then he laughed. It was a cold, mocking sound that echoed off the empty highway. He tossed the credentials casually onto the hood of Maya's Impala, the heavy gold shield, scratching the white paint as it slid down toward the windshield wipers. "I got to admit, that's high quality," Kincaid chuckled, his voice dripping with elitism. "What did that cost you? $50 on the internet? You think a shiny piece of tin is going to save you today? Now, open the door." Behind the white Impala, rookie Deputy Jesse Cole stood frozen, his hand sweating against his holster. The heat from the asphalt was radiating through his boots, but his blood had gone entirely cold. He had seen the gold shield slide across the hood. He had seen the red holographic watermarks on the identification card. He knew it was real. A wave of pure panic washed over him. He wanted to step forward, to grab Kincaid's shoulder, to tell him to drop the gun, but his body refused to move. He looked at Kincaid's rigid, tensed shoulders, then at his own dashboard camera, calculating the angles. He knew what happened to rookies who broke the unwritten rules of the department. He thought of his pension, his probation, period, and the silent, ingrained pressure to protect his partner no matter what. His silence was an active choice, a heavy, shameful weight that sat in his chest, like lead. "Travis, hold on," Cole called out, his voice thin and trembling as he took a tentative half-step forward. Let her show the ID. Just let her show it, man. What if it's real?" "Shut up, Cole," Kincaid screamed over his shoulder, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. I told you to watch the road. She's a fake. Just another smooth-talking criminal trying to run a scam in my county. Kincaid turned his head back to Maya, his nostrils flaring, his finger tightening on the trigger of his Glock. He was too deep in his own prejudice to see the ledge he was standing on. He had already decided who she was, and he was willing to pull the trigger to prove himself right. "All right," Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried over the wind. "I'm stepping out." With her left hand, she reached for the door handle. But beneath the steering wheel, completely hidden from Kincaid's sight, her right hand dropped to the center console. She didn't reach for her service weapon. Instead, her fingers found the heavy, encrypted satellite transmitter bolted beneath the dash. By feel alone, she flipped the protective cover on the side of the radio. She pressed and held the red emergency button for 3 solid seconds. It was a silent signal. In the Phoenix Operations Center, 200 miles away, an alarm instantly blared, broadcasting her precise GPS coordinates to every federal vehicle, state trooper, and U.S. Marshal within a 50-mile radius. A code, 10 to 13, was now screaming through the federal network. Maya pushed her door open and stepped out into the blinding heat. The moment her feet hit the gravel, Kincaid lunged. He grabbed her by the shoulder of her t-shirt, yanking her violently forward, and slammed her, chest first, against the hot metal of the Impala's roof. He kicked her legs apart with his heavy combat boots, the gravel scraping against her sneakers. "Hands behind your back!" Kincaid roared, holstering his gun and ripping a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Sloane Maya didn't fight him. She let him wrench her arms behind her back, the back of an Ender 718, raw steel of the cuffs, pinching her skin as they clicked tightly into place. She pressed her cheek against the hot white metal of the roof, the heat burning through her skin. She closed her eyes, her breathing steady, her mind focused on the silent countdown running in her head. Kincaid leaned down, his breath hot against her ear as he whispered a quiet, derogatory word under his breath, a slur meant to reduce her to nothing, to remind her of her place in his world. "I'm going to ruin your life," Kincaid whispered, impersonating an officer. "You're going to a cell, and you're never coming out." Maya said nothing. She rested her face against the hot metal, her father's brass compass pressing against her chest through her windbreaker, and she waited. The white-hot glare of the Arizona highway began to vibrate. At first, it was nothing more than a low, almost silent thrumming in the soles of Kincaid's combat boots. A deep-seated hum in the asphalt that might have been mistaken for a passing freight train miles away. But within 5 seconds, the vibration became a physical growl. The hot gravel of Route 9 began to dance. Jesse Cole's head snapped toward the horizon, his jaw dropping as the heat haze on the straight, flat stretch of road broke. 6 matte black unmarked Chevrolet Tahoes and Ford Explorers tore through the matic, shimmering air, moving in a tight, synchronized, tactical diamond. They weren't just driving. They were consuming the distance at over 100 miles an hour. Blinding red and blue LED strobes pulsed from behind their heavy steel grills and windshields, painting the white desert landscape in a chaotic, frantic rhythm. The piercing, multi-frequency wail of federal sirens ripped through the federal, quiet air, a sound so immense and aggressive it seemed to rattle the teeth in Kincaid's skull. Kincaid's grip on Maya's shirt loosened. He took a half step back, his face tightening in confusion. What the? The federal convoy executed a rolling block with practiced military precision. 2 of the massive Tahoes swerved onto the opposite gravel shoulder, cutting off any forward escape route. 2 more slammed on their brakes directly behind Kincaid's Dodge Charger, boxing it in. The final 2 vehicles angled in aggressively, their heavy steel brush guards stopping mere inches from Maya's placid Chevrolet Impala. A suffocating cloud of dust and gravel washed over the scene, coating Kincaid and Maya in a fine layer of brown grit. Before the dust could even begin to settle, The heavy doors of the SUVs flew and open. Federal agents, drop your weapons. Drop your weapons now. Over a dozen heavily armed operators in olive drab plate carriers with bold, yellow letters reading FBI and U.S. Marshal poured into the dirt. Every single barrel of their short-barreled M4 carbines was leveled directly at the chest of Deputy Vance Kincaid. Jesse Cole didn't hesitate. The young rookie threw his hands high into the air and dropped to his knees in the dirt, his face pale and slick with sweat, completely surrendering to the overwhelming force. Kincaid stood frozen, his hands hovering awkwardly near his duty belt, his eyes wide and frantic as he looked at the wall of weapons pointed at his chest. "Step away from the vehicle and put your hands on your head. Do it now." The commanding voice boomed from the PA system of the lead Tahoe. Stepping out from behind the reinforced door was Director Sarah Mercer. She was a sharp, silver-haired force, her dark blue suit immaculate despite the dust, her badge on her hip, catching the glare of the sun. She didn't draw a weapon. Her presence alone was enough to dominate the asphalt. "Whoa, whoa, hold on," Kincaid shouted, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate squeal as he tried to project authority over the deafening sirens. "I'm a county deputy. This is my jurisdiction. I have a suspect in custody for forged credentials." Director Mercer ignored his protests entirely. She marched straight past Kincaid, her eyes locked on Maya, who was still standing calmly against the side of her Impala, her hands cuffed behind her back. Mercer reached down to the hood of the car, picked up the gold FBI shield and the identification card, and handed them to a U.S. Marshal. "Uncuff her." Marshal Wyatt Gibson stepped forward, a key clicking into the steel restraints. Maya brought her arms forward, wincing slightly as the blood rushed back into her hands. She rubbed her raw, red wrists, then turned to face Kincaid. "Officer Kincaid," Director Mercer said, her voice dangerously quiet, cutting through the hot wind like a blade. "Let me make this very clear. My agent is not a suspect. She is the lead compliance auditor with the State Department of DI Justice." Kincaid blinked, his throat dry, his brain struggling to process the shift. "What?" "No. She was driving an unmarked car." She swerved. "She was driving a State Fleet vehicle," Maya said, her voice carrying the quiet, heavy weight of a rock. "And she was conducting an unannounced compliance audit of your department. An audit that you just failed in exactly 90 seconds." Director Mercer stepped closer to Kincaid, her silver hair shining in the sun. "Your department has been under investigation for months for a widespread pattern of civil rights violations and illegal stops. This very morning, Maya, Miller was sent to see how your deputies treat a citizen when they think no one is watching. And you showed us exactly what we needed to see." Maya held up her gold shield. "My audit is the final requirement for your department's pending $8 million federal infrastructure grant. Without my signature of compliance, that grant is canceled. Your precinct will be defunded, dissolved by the state, and your career is finished." Kincaid's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The unearned crown of his authority had been completely torn away, leaving him looking small, pale, and pathetic in the middle of the desert highway. "Vance Kincaid, you are under arrest," Marshal Wyatt Gibson said, stepping behind him. With one swift, practiced movement, Gibson grabbed Kincaid's hands, wrenching them behind his back. The heavy, rigid-hinged federal cuffs clicked aggressively into place. Gibson reached down, unbuckling Kincaid's duty belt, the heavy leather holding his Glock, his taser, and his pepper spray hit the gravel with a metallic clatter. Gibson kicked the belt away into the dirt, leaving Kincaid standing defenseless. Across the highway, Jesse Cole was already talking to one of the FBI agents, his head nodding frantically as he pointed to the Dodge Charger's dashboard camera. "I've got the whole stop on my body cam." "The dash cam was running too," I told him. "It was a bad stop." I told him to let her go. Kincaid turned his head slowly, watching his partner turn on him to save his own skin. The rookie's structured silence had broken the moment the federal badges appeared, his loyalty vanishing in the face of prison. Maya stood tall against the hood of her car, the hot wind blowing dust across her face. She reached into her windbreaker pocket and pulled out her father's brass mechanical compass, pressing the cool metal against her palm. The contrast of the heavy brass against her raw skin was a grounding, steady reminder of her father's survival and of the quiet justice that had finally arrived on Route 9. The low, dry hum of the desk fan in the Clayton interrogation room did nothing to cool the heavy air. Under the harsh glare of the yellow fluorescent light, Kincaid sat with his chin slumped against his collar, his shoulders hunched. The arrogance that had defined his walk on Route 9 was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, gray exhaustion. On the metal table in front of him, the files from the State Department of Justice lay open. Investigator James Caldwell sat across from him, his face expressionless, his eyes cool and steady behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We have the dashcam footage, Vance," Caldwell said, his voice flat, professional, and completely unbothered by Kincaid's silence. "We have the audio from Deputy Cole's body camera. We have the GPS logs, and we have the digital recording of the stop, including the specific, derogatory word you muttered right before you slammed Agent Miller against the roof of her vehicle." Kincaid didn't look up. His hands, still cuffed in the heavy, rigid-hinged federal restraints, twitched against the steel table. "I didn't know who she was." The car was unmarked. "It was a bad stop." "It wasn't a bad stop," Caldwell corrected, his finger tapping the screenshot of Kincaid's empty incident log. "It was an illegal stop, an organized pattern of targeting drivers based on the color of their skin and the age of their vehicles. You didn't file a report because you expected the footage to be overwritten by the 48-hour loop. You expected her to be another silent victim who would crawl away and say nothing." Caldwell leaned forward, his shadow falling across Kincaid's face. "But this time, the woman you targeted was the lead compliance auditor of your entire department. Your partner, Deputy Cole, has already signed a full confession. He's detailed 5 other illegal stops you made over the last 2 months, stops where you manufactured charges of resisting arrest to justify your violence. He's cooperating fully to avoid a federal indictment." Kincaid's hands trembled against the steel. The realization of his complete ruin was settling in his chest like wet cement. His pension, his career, his house, and his freedom were all vanishing. The structured shield of protection that Sergeant Crane had built around him had been utterly demolished. He was alone, and there was no exit. Maya Miller sat in the captain's office at the Clayton precinct. The room was quiet now, the frantic scurrying of the local deputies outside her door having finally died down after a long, exhausting week. On her desk sat her father's brass mechanical compass, its scratched metal surface catching the soft evening light coming through the window. She picked up her pen and opened the final compliance report. Maya didn't hesitate. She signed her name at the bottom of the page in clean, decisive strokes. Beneath her signature, she stamped the red seal of the State Department of Justice. Non-compliant. The $8 million federal infrastructure and operations grant was dead. The Clayton Sheriff's Department was placed under immediate state-mandated trusteeship, its leadership stripped of their authority, its officers scheduled for mandatory independent reviews. The ingrained culture of bias and intimidation that Kincaid and Moore had protected for years was being systematically rooted out. Jesse Cole's cooperation had earned him a 60-day suspension and a 2-year supervised probation period under a state-appointed monitor. He would never patrol Clayton's roads alone again, but he had been given a second chance, a chance to choose courage over the comfortable silence that had nearly ruined his life. Maya picked up her father's compass and slid it into her windbreaker pocket. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out over the dusty streets of Clayton. The town was quiet, the white-hot heat of the afternoon giving way to a cool, purple dusk. For the first time in 6 years, the people of this county could drive Route 9 without checking their mirrors in fear. Her father's rules of survival had done their work. The truth had finally been heard. Vance Kincaid sat in a windowless cell at the Federal Correctional Facility in Florence, New Mexico. The metal bunk was hard, the gray concrete walls cold, and his hands, now completely empty of the badge he had abused, gripped his knees in the dark. The finality of his 12-year sentence was a physical weight, a silent, steady reminder that the power he once held over Route 9 was nothing more than a ghost. Maya Miller stood on her father's porch in Albuquerque, her hands holding the worn brass compass. She watched the desert sky turn gold and pink over the mesas, the wind chimes singing their quiet, familiar song in the evening breeze. She felt the heavy, peaceful weight of her father's legacy in her pocket, knowing she had carried his light into a dark place and brought the truth back into the sun. The white sand of Route 9 is quiet now, the faded tire tracks of the white Impala and the black Tahoes washed away by the desert wind. If this story of instant karma and profound justice moved you, please like and share this video to help spread the message of true accountability. Subscribe to our channel right now, so you never miss another explosive real-life tale of dramatic twists and human awakening.